is the value of free time? It's easy to calculate how much you would make from the time you work. As Americans, we usually only see value if we can write down a dollar figure exactly for it. What about free time? We know we need it. We need that time to be present with our families, to relax, to rest, and to do the things we enjoy. But we really wouldn't know how much it's worth if somebody asked us. Here's something I think about a lot, and I want to share it with you today because I think it explains something that a lot of high-performing men feel but rarely talk about. You've built some success to this point, but you may feel the tug of that still small voice asking, is this it? Today, I'm not talking about a breakdown or even burnout. I'm talking about something a little more subtle than that. A low-grade sense that something is missing from a life that, by every reasonable measure, should feel complete. I want to explore an explanation for that today. And it doesn't come from a therapist or a productivity coach. It comes from the Greeks. They were brilliant and also got a lot of things wrong. But I genuinely believe they understood something about human beings that we've almost completely lost. And the men paying the highest price for forgetting it are exactly the men that I work with regularly. Let me start with an assumption most of us are running on, because we rarely say it out loud, even though it shapes almost every decision we make. We assume time is a resource. Now, in work and business, resources are meant to be used. And the more you produce with the time you have, the more valuable you are as a person on the market. I'm sure that sounds so obvious, it barely registers. But I want to point out that this is actually not a law of nature. It's an idea, a relatively recent one actually. Before the Industrial Revolution, time wasn't measured in output. It was measured in rhythm. There were seasons, rest, feasts, labor, celebration. The week had a shape to it that wasn't defined so much by what you got done. The factories changed everything. When a man's value became tied to what he can produce per hour, something fundamental shifted in how we understand what life is actually for, and we live on the other side of that shift, but most of us do so without ever stopping to question it. Aristotle had a very different view. He believed that leisure was the highest use of human time. And I want to be careful here because when I say leisure, I don't mean vacation. I don't mean streaming shows. It's not defined as recovery from work so you can go back and perform better. He used the Greek word scholé. And scholé meant something closer to contemplation or even reflection. The pursuit of what is genuinely good for its own sake, with no other justification required. This is not supposed to be some hack that would make you more productive or help you show up better at the office, because it was the activity most worthy of a human being. Aristotle's argument was pretty direct. We work so that we can have leisure. We do not have leisure so that we can work more. Work is the means. Leisure is the end. That is the complete inversion of how most men in the culture today are actually living. And I think it's worth sitting down with for a minute. In 1948, the German philosopher named Josef Pieper wrote a short book called Leisure, The Basics of Culture. He was writing in a post-war Europe, in a world that was working so hard to rebuild through sheer grit and willpower. And he made the argument that almost nobody wanted to hear at the time. He said that a civilization that cannot be still is a civilization that has lost itself. And he wasn't talking about laziness. He was talking about something he called receptivity, the ability to be genuinely open to the world, to let reality and creation speak to you rather than constantly demanding it perform for you, to receive an experience instead of extracting value from it. He called the opposite of this the world of total work. And his description of it sounds almost uncomfortably accurate to today. It's a world where everything has to be justified by what it produces, where rest has to be earned, where a man who isn't being useful every waking hour feels somewhere deep down like a man who is failing, where even your hobbies get turned into side hustles, and your walks get turned into catching up on podcasts, and your relationships get evaluated by what they give you. Sound familiar? The love you experience in your life should not be evaluated by KPIs of ROI based on your time. You are not a machine. You have a soul, and so do the people you love. Here's the part that I think is really important to understand. I see that high performers are actually the most vulnerable to this problem, not the least, because they have the discipline and the systems and the identity to stay in the world of total work longer than almost everyone else. They can keep going when other people stop, which means they go further into the problem before they ever feel it. If you can't tell, I'm talking about this from personal experience. The average person hits a wall somewhere along the way and stops or slows down. The high performer hits it at 55 with a resume that looks like a monument and a quiet question that he's never had the time to answer. Viktor Frankl wrote that the primary human need isn't pleasure or even achievement. It's meaning. And what most men discover, often too late, is that productivity can fill a calendar, but it cannot fill a life of love. Meaning requires something else. As a coach, I actually have a worksheet to measure meaning, but it only captures the artifacts of it. It requires time that is not justified by output, time that is simply lived. And this is exactly what Aristotle was pointing to when he talked about scholé. I want to talk about the guilt for a second, because I think it's the thing that makes it so hard to actually act on. When I bring this up with my high-performing clients, the first reaction is almost never curiosity or relief. It's guilt. This feeling that stopping is falling behind, that reflection is self-indulgent, that a man sitting quietly is a man wasting time. I want to name where that guilt is actually coming from, because it's not coming from you. It's coming from a society and a system that is designed to extract maximum output from human beings. The factory needed workers who felt guilty when they weren't producing because it affected the bottom line. You've internalized that zeal for productivity so completely that it now feels like a personal virtue, like ambition. It isn't virtuous. It's a remnant of a system that was never designed with your flourishing in mind. So then, what does scholé actually look like in a modern man's life? I think it's important to be specific here because the abstract version of this is easy to dismiss. It is not a vacation where you check email from the pool. It's not a weekend where you optimize your sleep and nutrition so you can perform better on Monday. Those are still from the world of total work, just with better scenery and a nicer hotel. Real leisure looks like reading something with no application in mind. A conversation that goes somewhere you didn't plan with someone you love. Making something because your soul needs to make, not because it builds your brand. Taking a walk without earbuds. Sitting with a quiet question instead of immediately reaching for an answer. It looks like being fully present at dinner with your family instead of mentally running through tomorrow's agenda. It looks like giving your complete attention to something that will never show up on a performance review and not feeling guilty about it. The oldest human traditions in the world built this kind of time into the structure of life, not as a reward, not as optional recovery, but as a genuine need, because they understand something we've mostly forgotten, that a man who never stops to ask what he is living for will spend his entire life building only for himself and realize the years have gone by. I'm not going to give you a 5-step plan for building leisure back into your schedule, because the moment I do that, you'll optimize it, and then it just becomes another thing on the list you're already managing. That completely misses the point. What I want to leave you with is one question. When is the last time you did something with no output, no optimization, no audience, and no ROI? Something you did simply because it was worth doing, and because you are worth more than what you produce. If you can't remember, that's not a productivity problem. That's something deeper. And the Greeks had a name for the cure. The emptiness you feel when you let yourself isn't a sign that you failed. It's a sign that you succeeded at something that was never going to be enough on its own. Output is not the point. It never was. The point is a life that is worth living fully, deliberately, with your whole self in it. And you cannot build that life if you never stop long enough to ask what you're building it for. That's the conversation I want to keep having here. If it resonated, subscribe, and I'll keep going. I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear this message. My name is Chris Almanza, career and purpose coach and speaker. I wish you peace and success. God bless you.